Welcome to Hidden Reality, where we uncover the truths buried beneath the surface. Today we're launching an intense investigation into what's being presented to the public as a historic, straightforward peace agreement meant to end a major global conflict. But as we start to peel back the layers of this highly asymmetric deal between the United States and Iran, well, a completely different picture starts to emerge. What looks like a mutual treaty is actually hiding a massive, almost unbelievable shift in global power dynamics. In this explainer, we're going to examine the exact terms of this deal, point by point, and reveal the covert shadow war that's actively happening while the rest of the world is completely distracted. Okay, let's dive right in.
This supposed peace deal, the very architecture of a brand new geopolitical reality, hinges on exactly 14 points. That's it. Just 14 clauses that are designed to somehow halt hostilities, redefine borders, and completely reshape the financial future of the Middle East. But when you take a closer look at the actual text of these 14 points, it reveals a shocking imbalance that has literally left geopolitical analysts completely stunned.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that out of those 14 points, an overwhelming 13 of them seemingly favor only Iran. Just think about that for a second. A superpower like the United States sat down at the negotiating table and agreed to terms where almost every single concession heavily benefits their adversary. How exactly does a conflict initiated by the U.S. result in a treaty where their opponent walks away with 13 distinct victories? To even begin to understand this mystery, we have to follow the money. $300 billion. That is an absolutely staggering amount of money. Buried deep within the terms of this deal is a clause suggesting that if Iran, quote-unquote, behaves, the U.S. might actually fund a $300 billion post-war rebuild of the nation. It's incredibly similar to the Marshall Plan, where the U.S. rebuilt Japan after World War II, essentially taking a devastated nation and turning it into a global economic powerhouse. Why in the world would the United States offer to financially supercharge Iran like this? Well, this is exactly the kind of profound anomaly we look for here at Hidden Reality.
Section 1. The Billion-Dollar Mystery. Examining concessions.
So what are these actual concessions we're talking about? Well, for starters, the U.S. agrees to an immediate ceasefire and promises absolutely zero internal interference. That means they're agreeing to stop encouraging any public uprisings against Iran's leadership. There's also a 60-day pause on military action. On top of that, the U.S. is lifting its naval blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. Now, while this is being loudly touted as a huge win for global shipping, the reality is that Iran desperately wanted the strait open for its own lucrative business interests. But honestly, the most staggering detail? According to reporting from Al Jazeera, over $100 billion of Iran's currently blocked funds are going to be immediately released. So Iran is effectively getting a massive, immediate injection of unrestricted, ready-to-use capital.
To put into perspective why that released capital represents such a profound shift, you have to look at Iran's latent wealth. They hold 12% of the entire world's oil reserves and 16% of its natural gas. That is more latent energy wealth than massive players like Qatar or Kuwait. Yet, heavy sanctions have kept them completely isolated and financially restricted for years. By lifting these sanctions in this 14-point deal, the U.S. is effectively unlocking the floodgates. Iran could rapidly transform from a financially cornered, restricted nation into an incredibly wealthy global powerhouse, entirely flipping the economic balance of the Middle East overnight.
So you're probably wondering, what do the U.S. actually get in return for all of this? That brings us to point number 8, the atom bomb clause. This is basically the sole U.S. win in the entire 14-point agreement. It states that Iran agrees to never build a nuclear weapon. But here is the illusion exposed. 23 years ago, way back during the era of Saddam Hussein, Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei issued a fatwa declaring the creation of nuclear weapons haram, meaning strictly forbidden. Even former U.S. President Barack Obama acknowledged this very fatwa during a speech at the UN. So the U.S. is essentially claiming a massive diplomatic victory for securing a promise that Iran has already publicly maintained for over 2 decades.
Let's break down the actual mechanics of this nuclear threat to see how Iran has masterfully played this hand. It all comes down to centrifuge uranium purity. At a 5% purity level, you get standard civilian electricity. At 90%, you cross into weapons-grade atomic bomb territory. But Iran currently sits right at 60%. They hold their enrichment perfectly in this middle zone. And according to the source material in this explainer, this is a highly calculated move. Holding enrichment at 60% serves merely to intimidate the U.S. and Israel. It gives Iran massive, undeniable leverage at the negotiating table, but without actually crossing that ultimate red line. It's a brilliant geopolitical chess move. But while the world's eyes are glued to this treaty and this nuclear staring contest, something entirely different is unfolding, completely out of sight.
Section 2. The Shadow Invasion. Israel's Covert War. As our investigation reveals, this 14-point deal has severely infuriated America's absolute closest ally in the region. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is reportedly fiercely frustrated over the U.S.-Iran agreement. And while all the international cameras were completely focused on diplomatic handshakes and signed papers, Netanyahu covertly ordered a massive, multi-tiered military assault on Lebanon.
If we track this escalation chronologically, the shift is staggering. Just 3 months ago, the U.S. and Israel were executing a joint unified attack on Iran. They were locked in step. But as the U.S. started pivoting to negotiate peace, Israel aggressively shifted its own focus. A few weeks ago, covert Israeli drone strikes began heavily pounding Lebanon. And right now, Israeli ground forces have actively crossed the border and are capturing and holding Lebanese territory. Hidden Reality reveals that Israel is effectively expanding its borders and fighting a full-blown shadow war, at the exact same moment its primary ally is negotiating a peace deal. Which brings us to the absolutely shocking climax of this geopolitical fracture. Listen to this quote derived directly from the source reports. Israeli ministers are openly speaking against the U.S. and Trump, forcing the U.S. vice president to issue threats to quiet Israel. Think about how unprecedented that is. A major conflict that literally began with a united superpower alliance, the U.S. and Israel, attacking Iran together, has now resulted in Iran securing a highly favorable treaty, while the U.S. and Israel are now fiercely clashing with one another. Their historic alliance is literally fracturing in real time. Let's take a step back and look at the broader global dynamics uncovered by Hidden Reality.
Section 3. The final reflection. A fractured alliance.
The true hidden reality of this entire conflict is the incredibly stark divide it has exposed all across the globe. There is a fascinating split happening. On a state level, most Muslim governments actually abandoned Iran. Only Qatar and Pakistan offered any real assistance. Many other nations even released state-sponsored media opposing Iran. But tellingly, they had to completely disable the comment sections on those posts. Why? Because the ordinary citizens, the general public worldwide, overwhelmingly stood in support of Iran against the superpower alliance. It highlights a massive, glaring disconnect between state leadership and the actual everyday populace.
Which really leaves us with one final profound question to think about. A war started by united superpower alliance ends with those very allies completely divided, at each other's throats, while their original target walks away with immense financial and territorial leverage. So, who truly controls the hidden balance of global power? Because clearly, the surface-level treaties are just a distraction. The real game is being played entirely in the shadows. This mystery has been decoded by Hidden Reality. Subscribe to Hidden Reality for more deep dives